So I wanted to talk to you about an idea I had for a
Hmm.
play, a one
Yeah.
act play. And because I'm taking actually, by the time this airs, I'll probably be in the middle of an acting class where I learn how to act on like a stage and on a theater stage. And I always wanted to write our own one act play. And I thought, I can probably hold one act play for about 8 to 10 minutes on my own. Now that's having no experience or running off pure confidence. But there's a part of me that's like, you know what? I can do it. And I would love to write uh Spacers colon the Ballad of Tommy Sampson. For our listeners, Tommy Sampson makes an appearance in Spacers the Erebus Effect as an experienced medic NCO on Titan. And I love the idea of a veteran of the Titan Wars who is in the VA or whatever version of it is there. It could just be like three blue plastic chairs all lined up, and I sit down and I just start talking. So, about what time frame would Tommy Sampson be on Titan? Do you think, especially in the Erebus in that Erebus effect flashback that we wrote?
Well, the Airbus Effect flashback that I wrote, the sequence that has Tommy in it is set in 2339, which is about the middle of the first Titan War.
Okay,
That'd be equivalent to if the Iraq War that you were in, for example, lasted from 2003 to 2000, like from March of 2003 to December of 2011. The first Titan War lasted from about 2335 to 2343. So 2339 is about right in the middle. It's about right. It's right about the time. It's equivalently right about the time that the surge happened in the Iraq War.
right.
So, and which is also fitting because in 2339 in the Spacer Saga lore, the Alliance of Free Worlds is founded and basically jointly starts fighting the Draconists the with the ICA. They or it's complicated. I know we're sort of getting into the weeds here. It's complicated because they took over the duties of getting rid of the Draconis, but they also funneled money to the Draconis, so it was convenient for them because it offered them a way to keep the ICA out of their territory.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's very much like Syria and Iraq and all the ISIS wars.
it's very familiar. So how many deployments do you think Tommy Sampson did?
Oh shit, at least three or
He
four.
he strikes me as a three and done sort of guy.
Yeah, that's probably
Like
right.
gets
Well, yeah,
out
'cause
as
remember we had in that draft we said like he was on his third and he was gonna be done.
yeah, and and this could be like 5 years after he's done,
Mm-hmm.
and so
So it was like 2345.
that's 5 years after. Now, is the Titan War still going on?
There's a break in the Titan War because there's the first Titan War and then there's the second Titan War, which takes place during the second Draconis crisis. I
Okay,
know this is all very dense,
but
hoary stuff.
I love Dents and I love lore now, but with a stage play, it's very much you're
Mm-hmm.
laser focused on the
That's a
character.
snippet.
Yeah, it's focusing in on the human condition, the character to rip people's hearts out.
I've got an
So,
idea for you.
what you got?
Um, about so yeah, I'd say that let me try to explain it in a way that will make sense, and like that's approachable, basically. Um, the first Titan War ends in 2343.
Okay.
So let's say that Tommy Sampson gets home in 2340 or 2341 from his third deployment,
Mm-hmm.
which is about the time he probably would, based on when he is on his third deployment in the Airbus effect flashback. Um, well, that being said, let's say that in 2347, when the second Titan War begins, he is going to the VA and is now like he's like watching the news about how this war is now starting up again, and it's like, well, didn't we deal with this problem already? And that might be what like sets him off. Like that's like you get like it's like those stories like you hear about in there's
Yeah.
a phrase that was the way one of my creative writing professors at IUPUI described it, who's really good at describing these sorts of things. It's like it's a story about this, but it's really about this.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is. Where it's like Tommy Sampson's talking about his problems and like his history, but he's also talking about these things because he's venting about the fact that the Titan War is still not over, that it's
Yeah.
basically starting up again, and the same people are suffering, and the same spaces are going back in. It's kind of like again the ending of the movie Jarhead, where Jake Gyllenhaal's characters are, where the character of Anthony Swafford is saying, we're still in the desert. And it's like 12 years later. And
Yeah.
you see that there's a clip, there's a little clip. This has always stuck with me. There's a clip where it shows Jamie Foxx, who was already like a veteran NCO in the first movie, in the first Gulf War, who's like going back into Iraq in the second, like in the Operation Iraqi Freedom. It's like these people are, the same spaces are going to be fighting this war basically, and Tommy's like, well, I'm done, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I'm not bitter about
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely write that. I know when I got out, I saw all my friends either do COVID missions or riot control
it.
training. They never had to deal with the riots during the Floyd riots after he was murdered. But they had to train just in case, things got crazy.
Yeah.
And
And then of
uh
course, there's the other parallel, which is, again, there's lots of parallels obviously in this work if we want to dig into it. But you
yeah,
look at the fact that yes, Operation Iraqi, the war centered around Operation Iraqi Freedom technically ended in December of 2011, or at least the like last combat troops were pulled out. But then we went back in a couple years later when ISIS started fooling around. So, and we're still there. So that's kind of the thing with Titan. Because the thing about Titan that's crucial to know from like from for you and also for our listeners who are interested in the lore is that in 2389, when the Frontier Wars storyline starts, like the main storyline that I fiddled with for almost 20 years now, that was the
yeah,
original seed of all of this. Titan is jointly controlled. It's basically partitioned. It's like half controlled by the Alliance and half controlled by the ICA. There's like zones of control. It's basically like who controlled what at the end of the first Frontier War or first Frontier Wars. They basically are left those zones of control
it's
in the
East
second
and
one.
West Germany.
Exactly. It's East and West Germany. It's East and West Pakistan if you want to go further back, or maybe not further back, but a little bit but around back to like back when Bangladesh was still considered part of Pakistan. It's Northern Ireland. It's all of that.
Yeah. No, I like the idea of there's a break in the war, there's a break in the conflict, and then Tommy sees the war that he's spent so much time trying to get over activating again, getting back again. I love the idea of it opens with he's watching a program, a broadcast, maybe with a couple of other veterans, and they're all kind of turned around facing a TV, facing a wall with a TV on it. And they're talking to each other, and then my character turns around and kind of addresses the audience. It's like, do you fucking see this? Like, we spent all this time there, and then they pulled us out, and then the whole fucking place fell apart. Surprise, surprise. And now it's all back to shit again.
Yeah.
And that could easily be, I never served in Afghanistan,
Yep.
but that was a bad week.
Yeah.
And
You can imagine what it'd be like for the guys who are actually there.
I've spoken to some. I don't want to speak for people, but I know some people that told me they put that behind them a long time ago. Some of them haven't. Um, I know it is kind of cool though that we have refugees from the airlift um living here in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And because you kind of you see them walking around. I'm not gonna say where they live, but you see them walking around a bunch.
Yeah.
And so the play starts with those guys addressing a TV, and then turns around and he addresses a crowd. And that'll be a lot of where you come in, where like with the specifics and stuff.
Mhm.
And now does he just kind of talk about Titan, and then I wonder if then he kind of goes into where he was born.
Yeah.
And
I mean, because that's the thing. It could very easily become like a sort of winding stream of consciousness type thing. Like he's like just sort of he starts venting, and then as he's venting, he starts like talking about like he's almost like basically doing his own self therapy in the lobby of
oh
the VA.
yeah,
And
oh yeah,
then the doctors call him back for his like actual therapy, which is basically just like taking his temperature or something. And it's like, you know,
exactly.
which we don't have to show obviously, but it's implied. Where it's like, oh, he's just there for like a regular checkup, but he's basically doing his own self therapy in the lobby because he's just old and burnout and grizzled and whatever in
Oh, I
search
know
of
all about
activity.
doing self therapy. I can
Yeah.
definitely write from that perspective.
It's
Um,
like, we were I was on Titan for almost 4 years, and we did and we might as well have never been there,
yeah.
and uh, just talk about this and that and the other thing, and start talking about when I left Mars because growing up on Mars there were only two ways out of the slums, and that was either to to suffocate to choke your lungs out in a factory or join the Space Corps and go fight on some faraway rock.
Yeah.
That's pretty much where we could go from there.
Yeah. So he has 3 deployments, and we see his third deployment in the Erebus effect. Now, what do you think haunts Tommy Sampson? Because yes, this is an old character of mine, but we're kind of brushing him off, and then
Kind of adapting him,
yeah, yeah,
kind of
we're
dropping him into a new
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Um, I think well, this is something where a lot of collaboration is going to come in because there's stuff that we could probably adapt from your stories to the realm of the Spacer Saga, but there's also stuff that obviously is unique to the Titan experience and but also to his experience because I'm assuming we want him to be like an NCO medic, especially in his later deployments. Um,
There's a group that's cannibals, right? You remember we had to talk about cannibals a few weeks back?
yeah. Well, here's an idea.
Would he interact with those at all?
Here's something that just popped into my head, and
What you got?
we can workshop this now. There's a and this is going to be kind of a roundabout explanation, so you just have to bear with me. There's this thing that goes on every September. This art competition called not really a competition. It's like a personal challenge. It's called Spaceship Timber, and it's kind of like like and it's one of those self competitions for art where it's like do an art piece every day of the month. There's like themes for each day of the month. And the one for I think today was like discovery or something. And someone on Twitter or X or whatever it's calling itself now had posted something where it's like, or no, it was on the Tough Sci-Fi Discord server. Had posted something about it was a piece of art they did, and they did a little block of text to go with it, like a little story. And basically, the gist was, oh, search and rescue is not that bad. Everyone goes in expecting to find ghosts, and sometimes you do find some in the form of like ships wanting you to leave because like the electronics are bad or something. But what's really creepy is when you find things that are most definitely not ghosts. When you like I can't remember the exact wording, but it's like fucking brilliant. It's a fucking brilliantly haunting. It's like when you find someone who's been surviving on sea rations for 8 months and you look in their eyes, that will haunt you.
Yeah.
So it's like refuge like Titan like refugees of like bombed out settlements who like been living on who've been living on survival rations for months at a time. Like the Spacer Corps moves in to like try and rescue them because the Draconis are like crazy people. They don't
Yeah.
care. They basically say, hey, if you're not gonna fly our flag, then fuck you. You can starve to death.
Yeah.
Or you can go without air. So yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe that's what haunts him.
I like that. Kind of like stumbling on Auschwitz.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
basically. Yeah.
like those
It's like the people who liberated the concentration camps, or like on a much smaller scale. Have you ever seen Full Metal Jacket?
yeah.
You remember the scene where they find the like the big pit with all the dead like Vietnamese nationals that have been executed by the Viet Cong or NBA or whatever?
No, I just
Yeah.
remember the basic training stuff.
Oh yeah, of course. That's what everybody remembers.
Eh,
But there's a scene. There's a scene when they're going into Hue City where there's like this big long trench that's been dug by the North Vietnamese that have like invaded the South during the Tet Offensive, and there's like maybe 2 dozen bodies that have been of people who've been like executed, have like been identified as intellectuals and
yeah, people
like
with
politicians.
glasses.
Well, no, that's the Khmer Rouge. Maybe not intellectual. Intellectuals might not be the right word for it, but like political opponents
Yeah,
of the North.
yeah,
People who the North has identified as like friends of the South Vietnamese regime, and they've been executed and then dumped in this pit and covered with lime. And it could be something. It could be stuff like that. Like yeah, basically the Draconists, like the reason why the Draconists earned their nickname, which is again I think I told you the other day it's partially because it's a reference to the acronym of their official title in Portuguese,
yeah,
but it's also based on the fact that they use draconian methods, which is again it's like again another very famous Vietnam War movie, Apocalypse Now. Colonel Kurtz is talking about how you you try and win over hearts and minds by going into a village and inoculating all the children, and then you come back later and you find all the arms of these inoculated children have been hacked off and piled in the corner and piled in the town square. It's like you look at that and you realize that horror has a name, and it's like yeah, that's basically what we're dealing with here.
yeah.
That's the kind of thing Tommy might deal with.
I like that. I like the Auschwitz thing. Where they find refugees that have just been nearly starved out. Um, I like the idea of. I wrote something in Veterans of the Bell Run War where there was this. I think we talked about this during the cannibal episode where there was the way of eating religion, and the
Yeah.
way of eating religion, they would try to corrupt people. They can corrupt Earth soldiers on the human basis,
Mm-hmm.
and then if they did that, they could flip people, and if they did enough, they'd flip whole bases and turn people into cannibals and stuff. And something about the deeply devoted religion, along with the horror of cannibalism, fascinates and terrifies me at the same time, and I'm just like obsessed with it. Um, but there was a piece where I wrote where a guy was a medic, not Tommy Sampson, but one of his
Mm-hmm.
contemporaries, and stumbled across a suicide ring where 6 guys all killed themselves, and then he held on to it to this day. So maybe I could work something like that in there.
Yeah. I mean, there's stuff that we want examples of stuff like this. Obviously, you've probably got plenty just from your time in Iraq, just from that deployment in Iraq. But my stepdad has been a police officer for 35 years. There's a story of his, which
There
I'm gonna,
was no suicide ring in Iraq that I found, by the
yeah,
way.
I,
Just
I figured not. I figured that probably would have come out at some point before now.
yeah,
Like
I
when you like tell me, hey, you should know this about me, so you know that I've got baggage.
well, it's more for the listeners because sometimes I'm like I tell stories and then I'm like, well, that's not a real story because
Yeah,
people like sometimes I lived just an interesting enough life where if I think of something weird or funny or fucked up, people might think it might have happened, you
yeah.
know. But I was thinking with this one act play, we could, because I mean, some simple math, like chop it up into either 2 or 4 sections, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you could have like the first chunk of it be Tommy's time on Mars, I guess, and then at first enlistment, second enlistment, and then he gets out, and then you could Mars first, second, VA, or he gets out, and the first enlistment he could be like, things are great and I love the military because I remember drinking the Kool-Aid. I remember it was, I mean, also too, it was the first place I was ever successful in my entire life. Now, granted, I was 19, and how many people are really that successful at age 19? So that's a fun pressure I was putting on myself.
Well,
But
here I have something to offer you there,
hit
actually.
me.
Because, well, first of all, I understand you want to write the screenplay, which is totally fine. I may be willing. I say that and it sounds totally pretentious. I would be willing to help you, like not what is it? What's the word?
Outline it.
Outline the screenplay because
Definitely.
there's some ideas that we might be able to work in to help structure it that would be able to give you those beats that you can then write in yourself when you're outlining when you're not outlining it but drafting it.
But
And one
if
of
you want
those
to
is that
outline it, that'd be fantastic.
yeah because one of those for example is if Tommy is how old would Tommy be in his third deployment? How old do you figure?
Let's say 35. So it could be
If
about
he's
my
35, if he's 35 in his third deployment to Titan,
uh
he probably would have enlisted still when he was about 20 or 21. Because so if Tommy enlisted around 19, he would have, or 20, he would have been inducted in about 20 or 21. So he's probably been in for about 14 or so years, which means that he would have enlisted around the time that the Draconis crisis was starting off. So the time he enlisted, let's say he enlisted in 23-24, 23-25, right around the time the Draconis took over Callisto and the whole crisis started brewing. It wasn't fully brewed yet, but it was starting to bubble a little bit. Because the Draconis crisis, which is what catalyzes the Titan War and among other things, didn't really get started until 2331, which is when the Draconis carried out this big terrorist attack at the Edwin Aldrin Memorial Spaceport on Mars, which killed like a couple thousand people, which is basically their equivalent of 9/11. And that's what drew the Space Corps into this massive, involvement in the outer solar system. But before that, for about 6 years, it was just a blockade. It was a blockade and like peacekeeping efforts. So when Tommy enlisted, he would have thought, oh well, the Space Force is a peacekeeping force. I can go explore the solar system and maybe do some crowd control and he handing out leaflets and handing out like bags of rice, and that'll be it.
what
So
I what I would like, just for my own, just
mhm.
just to keep it easy for me. And again, I'm not you can this is the difference between us as writers. Most of my stuff is just basically me, but in space.
Yeah.
So, and if I'm going to perform it, I'm going to tailor it to my own story
Mhm.
as much as I
Totally.
can, just so I can kind of get the emotion out. So, I would rather have the Draconis crisis be a few years into it. And it was because like I know for me, it was a thing that it was hanging. I'm 8 years older than you. Is that right?
Mhm.
When I was
Thereabouts. Yeah. You're like, I think
because I graduated in 2005 from high school.
you're about 7 years older than me.
Yeah. And I graduated, it was yeah. When I graduated high school, um the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were hanging over our heads. And where I came from, a lot of people enlisted to get out, to go to a lot of people into college, but the people I was hanging out with weren't going to college.
Mhm.
They just weren't. College was an option, maybe, if you had your shit together. I didn't. Uh, and I would love it if this war was hanging over Tommy's head, right? Or it was a thing like he knew where he was going.
Would you be opposed to him being younger than 35, 23, 39?
Not at all.
Because if he was about 30 or maybe about my age, which is still, again, when you consider that most of the like junior enlisted spacers that he would be talking to would be like, you know, 20 or 21 at most, a
Yeah.
29-year-old is like an old man, especially if he's been into 3 deployments.
I had a conversation like that in a writing online workshop class where
Mhm.
I'm talking to this 70-year-old retired Navy master sergeant, right? And I was telling this, I wrote this thing about how I was an NCO and we're sleeping in the back of a truck. It was me and a bunch of junior enlisted guys. We finally got out of the rain, so we're bunking down there for the night. And I was saying about how I felt so much older than them. And he's like, weren't you like the same age? And I was like, I might have been 5 years older. Like, but the your first enlistment and your third enlistment, there's a world of difference. You're
Mm-hmm.
not much older than the other people. Like my mentor NCO, the guy who was like a second father to me, his name was Tony. And when I was 19, 20, he might have been 30, 32. He's only 10 years older than me, but he was such a fucking giant in my memories. And so, yeah, he was a staff sergeant back then, too.
Yeah.
So, Tommy Sampson being 29, 30 on his third deployment is possible. And especially during wartime, you rank up really fast.
Yep.
Like I knew a guy who went to Iraq a corporal and left Iraq a staff sergeant, all in the same
Jeez.
12-month period. Now that guy was the supply sergeant, and he did an awesome job with the commander's property book to the point where she was not financially responsible for anything because shit just kept falling off of trucks, kids.
Yep.
But
If you get the chance, look at the thing I just shared in the Facebook chat. That is a picture of a Russian soldier in 1941 and in 1945 after he served for 4 years in World War II.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
that just goes to that's a classic example of how even though he's only 4 years older and is probably only like 24, 25 when that second picture was taken, he looks like an old man.
he
So
looks 40.
near the end of his third deployment on Titan, Tommy, even if he's only like 29, would be like an old man. So 7 years, 8 years later, in like 2347, he would
Yeah.
be a crusty old burnout veteran.
Yeah.
Because then he would be about your age.
Yeah.
No offense meant, but that's what he would be. If he was like 28 or 29 and 2339, he'd be about your age in 20 when the second Titan War started.
I mean, yeah, that works great because I'm my age now,
Yeah,
and
I was about
I'm
to say,
also a
what a
crusty burnt.
coinky dink.
I know, and I'm also a crusty burnt out veteran in my mid 30s. Like
Because
I,
because basically what you could have is, let's say Tommy Sampson is 28 in
yeah,
2339. That means that in 2347 he would be 36.
hmm,
That would mean that he was born in 2311. Okay,
okay,
which means that he would have turned 20 in 2331 when the attack on Edwin Aldrin Spaceport happened, which would
hmm,
have been a perfect incentive for him to join the war.
yep,
The war would have still been brewing for a few years before that, though, even though it wouldn't have technically been, because again, it's kind of like how, again, you have 9/11 in September, you have the 9/11 attacks in September of 2001, and then Operation Enduring Freedom begins like October of 2001 for the very next month or something, or like begins with really within weeks.
hmm,
So there's like official operation names that were launched, like operations that were launched to go fight the Draconis, like after the Edward Aldrin spaceport attacks. But again, the war was basically going before that. If anything, the reason the Draconis attacked in 2331 is because they were pissed off that. In fact, this is something totally out of left. This is something totally out in the weeds that we don't need to worry about for this project. But there's like we could even work into the lore that there's rumors that it was actually a different group that carried out the attacks because they wanted or maybe even like a false flag attack trying to get the ICA to get involved on Callisto and Ganymede and Titan and elsewhere because the Draconis were getting out of hand. And so far, the ICA was trying to rely on diplomacy and peacekeeping forces instead of actual military endeavors.
like a Gulf of Tonkin sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. It's basically the Gulf of Tonkin, or fuck, look what the Germans did at the start of World War II. Have you ever heard that story? Because we just had the anniversary of the start of World War II like 3 days ago. Basically, what the Germans did on September 1st, 1939, they had SS soldiers dressed up in Polish uniforms attack a German listening post or like radio station just inside the German side of the border. And they then executed some drugged prisoners and dressed them up in German uniforms and left them there and said, "Oh, look, the Poles have been attacking us. We're going to war." Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah. Okay. And
Basically, what that was.
I think with this, I say one act play, but it's going to be basically 4 different sections to it. And
4 major beats.
yeah, 4 major beats to it. Beat 1, Mars. Well, you're going to have an intro. He's going to be talking to the TV. Beat 1 is Mars. Beat 2 is deployment 1. Beat 3 is deployment. We'll call it deployment 3, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. And he could talk about the Flappy Bird, the Flappy. We call them the Flappers, and the Flappers kept dropping bombs and shit like that, like we got in the thing. And beat 4 can be kind of a spin on his life in Veterans of the Belron War, where he's just like a dude who he's got a ship, he flies around, he's in love with his holographic assistant, because AI is pretty big in this.
Yeah.
And
dude, that reminds me of something. Again, this is a total digression.
Because I don't have a whole lot more time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Digressions are good for a podcast normally. Also, I think I picked up a bug from a 19-year-old, so my throat's hurting a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Because I want to get this out. Anyway, so beat 1, Mars. Beat 2, deployment 1. Beat 3, deployment 3. Beat 4 is post-military. He's flying around in his ship. He's doing odd jobs. He's like a medic for hire in different ports and different things.
Mm-hmm.
And his like home VA is probably where his like family is on Mars, I would guess. And he's got a relationship with his folks, but it's kind of estranged.
Yeah.
But also, what are you gonna do?
That doesn't sound familiar at all.
Doesn't sound familiar at all. And yeah, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just gonna say, there was an idea I had at one point that I've still bounced around a little bit. I'm probably not never going to do anything with unless I do use it for a different story, about having someone like Darius and one of the like Darius stories have a VA virtual assistant that's basically like a talking dog hologram. It like follows him around. It's like, hey, you doing okay today, buddy? I know you've been feeling kind of down. Is everything going all right? And then like helps him out with other stuff. It's kind of like Zero in the Airbus effect, except in the Europa Goodbye, it would be this like hologram of like a border collie that like kind of follows him around because it's like projected out of this like implant in his brain that only he can see it. So it's kind of like a consent. It's kind of like a consensual hallucination. And he's like, and basically it's like, hey, you're taking your meds. You're not drinking too. You're not drinking too much. You're taking care of yourself, right, buddy?
So you're saying we'd write in the rewrite there, we would add that additional character there.
I might do that. Now I'm starting to like it. Now that I've spoken it to life, I'm starting to like it. Or maybe he like gets it added for like the second book or something. Because remember, just like I'm trying to turn Janet's story into a trilogy, or we're trying to turn Janet's story into a trilogy, I'm trying to turn Darius's story into a trilogy.
Yes to all the above. My only request is that the dog serves a vital function in the narrative.
Yeah.
The dog performs a function that only the dog can perform, and without the dog, the narrative falls apart, i.e., he is so important to the narrative, the way it's constructed, that if you pulled him out of it, the story falls apart. It would be like pulling out the assassin in Aramis. If you pull out the assassin, the story falls apart.
So maybe instead of a holographic dog that can't actually interact with other characters, it's like an actual service dog that has like an implant in its brain that allows it to like rudimentarily speak.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you okay?
I like the hologram
You
angle.
do?
I do. I like the hologram angle. Um, I
I know
almost
we're
want.
I know we're totally off the subject of your play. I'm
No, you're
sorry.
fine. You're fine. I think we've kind of hashed out the main beats of
Mhm.
Spacers, the Ballad of Tommy Sampson, and I would love it if you gave me an outline to work through
Might
because
even start working on that tonight.
you're better at outlining shit than I am. I just kind of like start writing and see what happens. And which is fun, but also it ends with me having to redo more stuff than I probably need to. But if you hand me an outline with some stuff, I can spin it into some gold.
Yep. Cool.
Um, I don't have a whole lot more time, but I want to run this by you too. I think I'm going to record, assuming my voice holds. I'm going to record the first chapter of Erebus.
Mm,
And
cool.
what are your thoughts of me doing it on my own?
Doing what now?
Recording it on my own
Oh, sure.
as like the only narrator.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
You got a good enough voice.
Yeah, yeah, and
As
it's
long as, like you said, as long as your voice holds.
yeah. Well, I mean, as long as I think I'll be fine, but I also might be sick tomorrow. So, um, and I say that because it's simpler if I do it on my own. It's a
Mhm.
lot less editing work on
Yeah,
my part if I do it on my
and
own.
a lot less cats to herd.
It's a lot less cats to herd. It's I'd love to get a whole big dynamic group together, but also I'm like, it's gonna be about a 20-minute project. And I mean maybe I'll herd all of you cats together and we'll do it in a big uh thing. Um
Just keep me posted, buddy.
yeah, but you'd be okay if I did
Oh
it
yeah,
solo.
yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, we had Spacers recorded solo, so
Yeah.
that turned out just fine.
I love the idea of doing full, cast productions on things. But also, I'm trying to remind myself that, hey, you have exactly this much bandwidth to do a thing.
Hmm.
And maybe if you keep things that you try to do as simple as possible, the simplest versions probably will be better. It's kind of like we talked about doing this play, and you said, oh, we got to get you some futuristic clothes. And I was like, I don't think so, because I think futuristic clothes, I just, in my head, like just normal street clothes.
Hmm.
It's going to be more realistic. People might buy that more.
Yep.
Because in my head, I'm like, oh, well, what is it going to be like paper mache or, like it's, I'm not going to name names, but we saw a play recently and it wasn't what you call good. And they had like a lot of props and the props weren't what you call convincing. And granted, I'm a huge snob. I'll start there. But yeah, no, and
I think in hind, you know, I'm gonna say one thing. The only thing I'll say about that play
what
is
you
that
got?
that night after we saw that play, I had a dream that I went and saw that play again with my creative writing friends, many of whom are like Broadway addicts,
Mm-hmm.
and the one of them in particular who I've talked about in the past, the one who lives in New York now, like goes to Broadway every week, was like, "Oh no, this is an underappreciated play. It was brilliant." And I was like, I woke up and I was like, "What the fuck is going on in my head?"
I'll say this. The play was a retelling of the Mount Vesuvius eruption and the destruction of Pompeii. And that was the first retelling of that story that made a case for the volcano, right? It made a case for the side of the fire. As I'm watching this, I'm thinking, when will the fire take me? I hope it takes me soon. And with that note, I think we'll end there and we'll chat a little bit after. For the Blanket Fortress of Solitude, I am Derwin.
And I'm Nick.
And we will see you next Monday morning at 0700.
Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Read. What's happening? Am I dead?
I bet you like zombie books.
I like food. Do you have food?
You don't need food at dividedbyzerobooks.com. It's full of nutrient-rich science fiction.
Ugh, I'm stuck in an ad, aren't I?
Once I stop talking, reality will collapse until someone plays this ad again. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, and it won't be the last. Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Did you say you like barbecue or not?
I like the taste of barbecue. It doesn't always agree with me. It doesn't always like me as much as I like it. As she navigates a pandemic, late-stage capitalism, while pretending everything is totally fine, Sloane lives alone with her dog, Moose. Struggling with this juggling act, Sloane breaks down one night and wishes magic were real. The next thing she knows, she's having a conversation with her dog and levitating a spoon in her kitchen. Subscribe now to Versatile Ambitions on Substack and read the first chapter of Once a Millennium today.
It was exactly 1 month after I got to Iraq. Passed the PT test today. Not by a whole lot. Always a proud moment with every milestone I have. The things I've seen, the hijinks that ensue.